Wyoming Territory, February 1897. The fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls of the main house. Outside, February wind howled through the valley, rattling windows and sending snow spiraling into the darkness. Caleb Thornwood sat in his leather chair,
What?
the one he'd built with his own hands
We need to
30
move
years
quickly.
before watching his grandson
The others will
pace near
catch
the
up
door.
soon.
Jonathan was 18, tall and lean, like his grandfather had been at that age, with the same restless energy that came before departure. His uniform lay folded on the table, freshly pressed, the blue wool darker than the Wyoming sky. Tomorrow he would take the train east, join the army, head toward whatever war the politicians in Washington had decided needed fighting. The boy stopped pacing, turned to face Caleb. Firelight caught the uncertainty in his eyes. "Grandpa," Jonathan said, voice tight, "I leave in the morning, and I'm scared, not of dying. I'm scared I won't know the right thing to do when the moment comes." Caleb studied his grandson for a long moment, the way he'd learned to study tracks in snow, reading what lay beneath the surface. The old mountain man was 64 now, his hair white as January frost, his beard long and carefully kept. The scar on his left cheek, gift from a grizzly bear 45 years back, had faded to a pale line that disappeared into his whiskers. But his eyes remained sharp pale blue, like winter ice. He'd seen men head off to war before, had fought in a few skirmishes himself back when the land was wilder and the law was whatever you could enforce with a rifle and hard stare. Fear before battle was natural. Fear of moral failure was something different, something deeper. "Can I ask you something?" Caleb said, his voice quiet but carrying weight like stones dropping into still water. "Do you know why your father named you Jonathan?" The boy shook his head. "After David's friend," Caleb said. "From the Bible. Man who made a covenant. Not a contract, not an agreement, a covenant. Sacred promise that didn't need paper or witnesses because it was bound by something deeper than law." Jonathan waited. His grandfather wasn't one for long speeches. When Caleb Thornwood spoke more than a few words, you listened. "Courage isn't not being afraid," Caleb continued. "Courage is doing what's right when every voice around you says it's wrong, when the easy path looks safe and the righteous path looks like it'll destroy you." He paused, let the fire pop and settle. "Let me tell you about the hardest choice I ever made, about the time I had to decide between what was legal and what was right, between what was proper and what was true." He gestured to the chair opposite in him. Jonathan sat. "This was 30 years ago," Caleb said. "September of 1867. I was 34 years old and I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life, or so I thought at the time." The old man's eyes went distant, looking past the walls, past the years into memory. "I'd better start at the beginning," he said. "Back when I first laid eyes on the woman who would change everything I thought I knew about family, about love, about what it meant to make a covenant before God." He settled deeper into his chair. "3 women, actually. 3 women and a mountain man who didn't know his whole life was about to turn upside down." Wyoming Territory, September 1867. 6 days of hard riding lay behind Caleb Thornwood as his horse crested the final ridge. The animal, a tough little Mustang he'd bought in South Pass City, was tired but game. Its breath came in white puffs in the cool morning air. Below in the valley where Sweetwater Creek cut through grassland, turning gold with autumn, sat the ranch that was supposed to be his new beginning. Supposed to be empty. Caleb reined in the Mustang, pulled his brass telescope from his saddlebag. The tube was scratched and dented, bought off a dead soldier after some forgotten skirmish. Through it, the valley sharpened into focus. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house. Not the thin, cold smoke of a dying fire, but the thick gray column of a working hearth. Someone had been burning wood all morning, keeping the place warm. He swept the glass across the property. The barn doors stood open. Through them, he could see movement shadows against the lighter interior. Someone working. He adjusted focus, counted at least 2 figures moving around the corral where a dozen horses stood. This wasn't right. Caleb had paid good money for this land, $3,400 earned through 16 years of trapping beaver in the high country, hunting buffalo on the plains, selling hides and meat to forts and settlements. Every dollar soaked in cold water, stinking pelts, and months of solitude. The seller, a man named Silas Blackwood, had assured him through letters and a lawyer in Denver that the property was vacant, ready for occupation. Deed filed with the territorial office, all legal and proper. He collapsed the telescope, tucked it away. His right hand moved automatically to check the Hawken rifle secured to his saddle, then to the Colt Navy revolver holstered at his hip. Both were loaded, both were clean. A man who'd survived 16 years in the mountains learned to keep his weapons ready, but he didn't draw either one. Instead, Caleb nudged the Mustang forward down the long slope toward the ranch. His eyes scanned the terrain with the automatic awareness of someone who'd spent most of his adult life reading land for threats. Good cover in those cottonwoods along the creek. Clear sight lines from the barn to the house. If whoever was down there wanted to ambush him, they had plenty of options. Yet something felt off about the scene. Not the cold calculation of men planning violence, but the comfortable routine of people at work. The smoke from the chimney rose steady. The horses in the corral stood easy, not nervous. Through the open barn doors, he could see tools hanging organized on walls, haystack neat. This was someone's home. Someone was living here, had been for a while. As he approached within a quarter-mile movement near the woodpile caught his eye. Someone chopping wood, the axe rising and falling in steady rhythm. Another figure emerged from the barn, carrying what looked like a milk pail. A third appeared at the corral, throwing hay to the horses. All three were women. Caleb pulled up his horse again, this time in genuine confusion. Women, out here this far from any town, working a ranch alone. That was unusual enough. But as he watched them work, noting the efficiency of their movements, the strength in the way the one at the woodpile split logs, something else struck him as strange. They were tall, all three of them. The one chopping wood stood easily 5'10" or better, shoulders broad under a man's work shirt. The one with the milk pail matched her height. The third tossing hay might have been a touch shorter, but still taller than most men Caleb had met in saloons. And they were dressed for hard labor, wearing trousers and boots, hair tied back practical. No fancy dresses or bonnets. These were working women dressed for it. He could see glints of metal at their necks. As he rode closer, the shapes resolved into crosses. Simple silver crucifixes catching the morning light. Nuns. Or former nuns. The clothes were wrong for proper sisters, but the crosses suggested religious connection. This made no sense at all. Caleb rode into the yard at a walk, hands visible, posture relaxed. The cardinal rule of approaching strangers was not to look like a threat. Let them see you meant no immediate harm, give them space to make their own decisions about how to react. The woman chopping wood saw him first. She set down the axe with deliberate care, turned to face him full on. Her face was handsome rather than pretty, strong-boned, framed by blonde hair, cut shorter than most women wore it. Her eyes were blue and cold as mountain lakes in winter. "You can stop right there," she said. Her voice carried authority, the kind that came from being used to giving orders and having them followed. Caleb reined in the Mustang 20 feet from her. The other two women had stopped their work, now moving to positions that gave them angles on him. Not accidental placement, tactical positioning. These women knew what they were doing. "Ma'am," Caleb said, keeping his voice neutral, "I'm Caleb Thornwood. I'm the new owner of this property." "We know who you are," the blonde woman said. "Caleb Thornwood, 34 years old, mountain man, trapper and hunter. Survived a fight with Blackfoot Raiders in 1855. Lost your Shoshone wife Morning Star to smallpox in 1862. No living family that anyone can trace." The words hit Caleb like cold water. This woman knew things about him that he'd told no one. The Blackfoot fight had been a running battle over 3 days in the Absaroka Range, had left him with a bullet scar on his left shoulder and nightmares that took years to fade. Morning Star's death was something he never spoke of, the kind of pain you buried deep and left alone. "How do you know that?" he asked. A second woman stepping forward, this one with brown hair and softer features, though her hands looked strong from work. Her eyes were brown and intelligent, studying him with the intensity of someone solving a puzzle. "Silas Blackwood told us," she said. "He knew everything about you, because he chose you, Mr. Thornwood. Very specifically chose you." The third woman moved closer, and Caleb could see now that her hair was red, her face dusted with freckles, her green eyes sharp as broken glass. She was the shortest of the three, which still meant she stood nearly as tall as him. "You didn't buy this ranch," she said. "You were sold into it." Caleb's hand moved toward his revolver, then stopped. These women weren't armed that he could see, and shooting unarmed women wasn't something he had ever done or ever would. but the implications of what they were saying made his gut tighten. I paid $3,400 for this land, he said, through a lawyer in Denver. I have the deed. It's legal. Oh, the deed is legal, the blonde woman said. She reached into her shirt pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper. But there's more paperwork than just the deed, Mr. Thornwood. There's this. She walked toward him, slowly stopped at arm's length, held out the document. Caleb took it, unfolded it with one hand, while keeping the other ready to grab his gun if needed. The paper was thick, expensive stock. At the top, printed in careful legal script, transfer of obligations. Below that, paragraphs of dense text. At the bottom, a signature he recognized from the deed, Silas Blackwood. Next to it, the seal of a Wyoming Territory Notary Public. He read quickly, his education limited but sufficient for legal documents. The language was deliberately vague in places, specific in others. The core meaning came through clear enough. Any person purchasing the property known as Sweetwater Ranch assumes all obligations, debts, contracts, and personal covenants of the previous owner, including but not limited to financial liabilities and binding commitments to Sister Judith Harrow, Sister Martha Penn, and Sister Grace Sullivan. The final clause made his blood run colder. Said obligations include provision of shelter, sustenance, protection, and marital union as per frontier, custom, and prior agreement. This is insane, Caleb said, looking up from the paper. I never signed this. I can't be held to a contract I didn't sign. Frontier law is complicated, the woman with brown hair said, her voice gentle but firm. Wyoming territory has precedents for transferred obligations. Debts follow land, contracts follow ownership. And Silas made very sure this was all legally binding. Legally binding is one thing, Caleb said. What you're describing is something else entirely. The blonde woman, the one who seemed to be the leader, stepped closer. This close, Caleb could see the pain in her eyes beneath the cold exterior. Old pain, the kind that had been carried so long it became part of the person. My name is Sister Judith, she said. Though I'm not properly a sister anymore. None of us are. That blonde hair was cut short because I couldn't maintain it while working this ranch. My hands are calloused because I've spent the last 10 months building this operation. And I know this sounds mad, but I need you to understand something very clearly. She paused, seemed to gather herself. We're not trying to trap you. We're not trying to force you into anything. But we're also not leaving. This ranch represents 10 months of our labor, our hope, our attempt to build something that matters. Silas Blackwood stole that from us. And according to his paperwork, you inherited the responsibility. The brown-haired woman spoke up. I'm Sister Martha. I designed the irrigation system that waters 40 acres of cropland. I built the windmill that pumps water from Sweetwater Creek. Those aren't just words on paper. That's work. Real work. The red-haired woman crossed her arms. I'm Sister Grace. I negotiated contracts with Fort Laramie's South Pass City and 3 mining camps. We have steady trade bringing in real income. This isn't some scam operation. This is a functioning ranch. Caleb looked at each of them in turn, trying to read the truth behind their words. He'd spent 16 years in the wilderness learning to judge character quickly. You had to when your life might depend on whether the stranger across the fire was honest or planning to cut your throat for your supplies. These women were afraid. He could see it in the tension around Judith's eyes, the way Martha held herself too straight, the defiant set of Grace's jaw. But they were also telling the truth as they understood it. I need to see what Silas left behind, Caleb said. All of it, the whole story, before I make any decisions. Judith nodded slowly. Fair enough. Come inside. We'll show you everything. She turned and walked toward the house. Martha and Grace followed, leaving Caleb space to dismount to secure his horse, to make his own choice about whether to follow. He stood there for a moment, one hand on the Mustang's neck, feeling the animal's warmth, the solid reality of muscle and bone beneath his palm. $3,400, 16 years of work. He'd come here for solitude, for a fresh start, for a chance to build something permanent after years of wandering. Instead, he'd found 3 women claiming ownership of his property, his future, possibly even his life. The smart thing would be to ride back to Laramie, find a lawyer, sort this out through proper channels. Let the territorial courts untangle whatever web Silas Blackwood had woven. But something in Judith's eyes stopped him from mounting up and riding away. That old pain he'd recognized. He'd seen it in his own reflection too many times not to know it when he saw it in someone else. These women had lost something, something important enough to make them grab onto this insane arrangement with a stranger. Caleb secured his Mustang to the hitching post, loosened the saddle girth to let the animal breathe easy. He pulled his rifle from its scabbard, held it loose in one hand. Not threatening, just ready. A man who went into unknown situations unarmed was a fool, and Caleb Thornwood had survived too long to be foolish now. He walked toward the house. The door stood open, yellow lamplight spilling out into the morning. Inside, he found a home. Not just a building, a home. The furniture was simple but well made, the floor swept clean, the dishes stacked neat on shelves. Curtains hung at the windows, letting in light while providing privacy. A large table dominated the center of the main room, scarred from use but sturdy. The smell of coffee and fresh bread mixed with the tang of wood smoke. The three women stood waiting Judith by the fireplace, Martha near a desk covered in papers, Grace by the window with arms crossed. "Sit," Judith said, gesturing to the table. "This will take a while." Caleb leaned his rifle against the wall near the door within reach and sat. The chair was solid under him, didn't creak or wobble. Someone had built this furniture to last. Judith remained standing, her back to the fire silhouetted against the flames. When she spoke, her voice was controlled, but Caleb could hear the effort it took to keep it that way. "I'll go first," she said. "You need to understand who we are before you can understand why we're here." She pulled a chair around, sat backward on it, arms crossed over the top rail. The posture was masculine, comfortable, like she'd forgotten to perform femininity and didn't much care. "My real name is Judith Harrow," she began. "I was born in Boston in 1832, married at 21 to a man named William Harrow. Good man, Union Army captain. We had 2 children. Matthew was 5 years old. Sarah was 3. She stopped and Caleb saw her jaw clench, saw the muscles in her throat work as she swallowed hard. William died at Gettysburg in July 1863. Shot through the chest leading a charge. Took him 3 days to die, but I didn't know that until the letter came 2 weeks later. He'd written me the night before he died, talked about coming home, about teaching Matthew to fish, about Sarah's laugh. The room was very quiet. Outside, a horse whinnied, the fire popped. That November," Judith continued, "there was a fire, started around 2 in the morning. Lamp oil, they said. The downstairs caught first. I made it out. Went back for the children. The stairs collapsed. Firefighters pulled me out. Matthew and Sarah burned to death while I screamed on the lawn." She said it flat without emotion, but Caleb recognized that tone. He'd used it himself when talking about Morning Star. The only way to speak of unbearable pain was to strip all feeling from the words, make them just sounds, just facts. "I have burns," Judith said, pulling up her left sleeve. The skin from shoulder to elbow was puckered and discolored, healed but never whole. Scars from where they dragged me out. I wear long sleeves always. Not from vanity, from remembering. She pulled the sleeve back down. I spent a year not speaking, not crying, just existing. My family tried to help, but I couldn't hear them. Couldn't feel anything except this vast emptiness where my life used to be. Finally, I went to the convent of St. Catherine, took vows, became a sister. Not because I believed God would heal me, because I thought maybe if I devoted myself to serving others, I wouldn't have to feel my own pain anymore. She stood, walked to the window, looked out at the land. It didn't work. Pain doesn't go away just because you ignore it. But the convent gave me structure, purpose. For 3 years, I worked in silence, helped run the kitchen, tended the gardens. Then in 1866, the Mother House needed sisters to go west. Wyoming territory. Do missionary work with the settlers and the tribes. I volunteered. Thought maybe distance would help. She turned back to face Caleb. That's how I ended up here. That's who I am, a widow, a mother who failed to save her children, a woman who joined the church to escape pain and left the church trying to find purpose. Martha stood next, moved to stand beside Judith. Her voice was quieter but carried its own weight of grief. "My name is Martha Penn," she said, "born in Philadelphia in 1835. My mother died when I was 8 at childbirth complications. My father raised me alone. James Penn, he was an engineer. Designed water systems, aqueducts, pumping stations. He taught me everything. Mathematics, mechanics, hydraulics. Not because he thought a girl should learn engineering, because I was his only child and he wanted to share what he loved. She smiled, brief and sad. He got tuberculosis in 1862. Took him 8 months to die. Toward the end, he couldn't speak, could barely breathe. But he'd make me bring paper and pencil to his bed. He'd draw blueprints, designs for pumps and valves and distribution networks. That was how he said, "I love you," through diagrams and calculations. She walked to the desk, picked up a leather-bound journal, held it like something precious. This was his. All his designs, his notes, his life's work. When he died, I had nothing else. My uncle wanted me to marry his business partner, a man 30 years older than me, who saw me as decorative property. I ran to the convent. They took me in. Let me work in their maintenance shop, fixing things, building things. For 3 years, I was useful. Then they needed someone with engineering knowledge to go west, help establish infrastructure. I volunteered. She set the journal down carefully. That's who I am, an engineer's daughter who learned to build because building was the only language of love I knew. Grace moved last, her steps sharp, angry energy barely contained. Grace Sullivan, she said, born in St. Louis in 1837, Irish Catholic family. My father Patrick was a fur trader, brought pelts down from the Northern Territories, sold them in the city. Taught me the business from the time I could count. Pricing, negotiation, reading markets, understanding people. Said I had a gift for seeing through lies. Her voice went bitter. Didn't help him. In 1864, his business partner, a man named Morrison, forged documents. Transferred all my father's assets into Morrison's name. By the time we realized what happened, it was too late. Legal, the lawyer said. Nothing to be done. My father lost everything. Business, house, reputation. Morrison offered to let me work off the debt as his mistress. Said it was a fair trade. She looked at Caleb, eyes hard. My father drank poison that night. Left me a letter. All it said was, "I failed you. Forgive me." He thought losing his money meant he'd failed as a father. Thought leaving me penniless was worse than leaving me orphaned. Her hands were fists at her sides. I went to the convent to escape Morrison. They protected me, gave me sanctuary. For 2 years, I worked in their business office, managed accounts, negotiated with suppliers. I was good at it. When they needed someone to handle trade agreements in Wyoming territory, I went, because staying in St. Louis meant eventually Morrison would find me. She stopped, took a breath, seemed to force herself to relax. That's who I am. A trader's daughter who learned to negotiate because it was survive or be bought. The three women stood together, now united in their scarred histories. Caleb looked at them, seeing past the height and the strength to the pain underneath. Three women who'd lost everything. Three women who'd run to the church for shelter and then left it seeking something more than mere survival. So you all came to Wyoming in 1866, Caleb said. What happened and then? Judith returned to her chair, sat properly this time. We met each other for the first time in January 1867, she said. Three sisters assigned to the same mission. The church had purchased this land, planned to establish a mission station. We were supposed to build it, run it, do outreach to settlers and peaceful tribes. We lived out of tents that first month while we started construction. Then Silas Blackwood showed up, Martha said, her voice tight. The name hung in the air like gun smoke. Tell me about Silas, Caleb said. Grace pulled out a chair, dropped into it. Silas Blackwood is the most dangerous kind of man, the kind who can make you believe everything he says while he's robbing you blind. He arrived in March of 1867, Judith said. Rode in on a beautiful horse, dressed well but not too fancy, carrying a Bible and a friendly smile. Said he was a Christian businessman from Denver, heard about our mission, wanted to help. Offered to donate money for construction to help us get established. For the first 2 months, he was perfect, Martha said. Charming, helpful, respectful. He'd show up every few days, bring supplies, offer advice. Never pushed, never demanded, just helpful. Month 3 is when things changed, Grace said. He started suggesting improvements. Bigger barn, better irrigation, more livestock. Said we should think bigger than just a mission. Should build a real working ranch, be self-sufficient. The church wasn't sending much support, so it sounded reasonable. He started courting us, Judith said quietly. All three of us, individually at first. He'd take walks with me in the evenings, talk about loss, about rebuilding life after tragedy. He knew exactly what to say. Made me feel seen for the first time since the fire. He'd work with me on construction projects, Martha said. Asked about my father, about engineering, actually listened when I explained designs. Made me feel like my knowledge mattered. He'd help me negotiate with traders, Grace added. Taught me frontier business practices, introduced me to contacts. Made me feel competent again. By month 4, Judith continued, he'd proposed to each of us separately, but not marriage exactly. He called it covenant partnership. Set out here on the frontier, traditional rules didn't apply. A good man could provide for multiple women, especially women who had no other protection. He used biblical language. Abraham and Sarah and Hagar, Jacob and Leah and Rachel. Made it sound righteous. Martha's voice was barely above a whisper. We wanted to believe him. God help us. We wanted to believe someone could want us despite our broken histories. He said we'd build something together, Grace said. A family, a purpose, that he'd marry us all according to frontier custom, that we'd share the work and the rewards. It sounded like everything we'd lost and thought we'd never have again. So we left the convent, Judith said, violated our vows, turned our backs on the church, because Silas made us believe we could have love and purpose instead of just duty and survival. She stood, walked to the desk, opened a drawer, pulled out a ledger. Month 5 through 8, things move fast. Silas ordered equipment, livestock supplies, everything on credit, but he used our names, not his. Said it would help establish our legitimacy as ranchers. The church had already abandoned the mission idea, signed the land over to us 3. We didn't question why Silas wanted purchases in our names. We trusted him. We worked like dogs, Martha said. Built the barn, installed irrigation, fenced pastures. I designed systems I was proud of. Grace established trade contracts. Judith managed operations. We were building something real, something that mattered. Month 9, Grace said. Silas started making excuses. Couldn't visit as often. Business in Denver required attention. We barely saw him. When we did, he was distracted, evasive. Early September, Judith said, opening the ledger. Creditors started showing up. Bills we didn't know existed. Equipment we'd ordered on credit payments now due. Supplies charged to our accounts. We owed over $2,000. Silas had ordered everything, signed our names, told vendors we'd authorized it. We confronted him, Grace said. Demanded explanation. He said he'd handle it, not to worry, it was all part of the plan. September 10th, Martha said. He disappeared, just gone. No note, no explanation. But we found out later he'd sold the ranch, to you, through a lawyer in Denver, for $3,400. He took the money and ran, Judith finished. Left us with debt we couldn't pay, a ranch we thought was ours but wasn't, and a contract saying the new owner inherited his obligations. She slid the ledger across the table to Caleb. These are the debts, all itemized. $2,320 due by October 15th, 3 weeks from now. If we can't pay, creditors can seize the ranch, sell it for the debt. We'll have nothing. Caleb opened the ledger, scanned the entries. The handwriting was neat, the accounting precise. Morrison and Sons General Store in Laramie, Wyoming Cattlemen's Association, lumber companies, feed suppliers. Every entry documented, amounts clear. You worked for 10 months building this operation, he said slowly. Silas used your labor and your names to establish credit, then sold the property out from under you and left you with the debt. Yes, Judith said simply, and this transfer of obligations document claims I inherited not just the land, but Silas's promises to you, including, she paused, reading from the paper again, marital union as per frontier custom. Yes, Caleb set down the ledger, looked at each woman in turn. Judith standing straight and tall despite the pain in her eyes. Martha, hands clasped together to stop them trembling. Grace, jaw set against whatever verdict he was about to render. I need to see the ranch, he said, everything you've built, before I make any decisions. Relief flickered across their faces, quickly suppressed. Of course, Judith said. Martha, show him the irrigation system. Grace, take him through the livestock operation. I'll prepare the financial records for full review. She looked at Caleb directly. Mr. Thornwood, I know how this sounds. I know how it looks. Three desperate women claiming a stranger owes them marriage and partnership. But I'm asking you to judge by what we've built, not by what Silas promised. Look at the work, then decide. Caleb stood, picked up his rifle. I'll look, he said. That's all I'm promising right now. Martha moved toward the door. The irrigation system is the heart of the operation. Everything else builds from it. Come on. She led him outside into morning sunlight, now fully risen. The air was cool but warming, carrying the smell of grass and livestock and the mineral tang of creek water. The valley spread out around them, golden and green, the kind of country that made a man's chest expand just breathing it in. But Caleb kept his attention on Martha as she walked him toward the main irrigation channel. She moved with purpose, comfortable in her own skin, not performing or posturing. Just a woman who knew what she'd built and was proud of it. They reached the creek bank, where a wooden flume directed water into the channel system. The construction was elegant, efficient, exactly the kind of engineering that spoke of someone who understood both theory and practice. The creek runs year-round, Martha explained, her voice gaining confidence as she talked about her work. Natural spring source 3 miles upstream in the mountains. I surveyed the land, found the optimal point to divert water. The grade is 2.5 degrees, enough for steady flow without erosion. She pointed upstream. The windmill pumps water to a holding cistern on that rise. 15 feet elevation gives us gravity pressure for distribution. From the cistern, wooden pipes feed 8 lateral lines. Each line has hand-carved valves for flow control. Caleb walked along the channel, examining the construction. The joints were tight, sealed with pine tar and oakum. The grade was perfect, maintaining consistent flow without pooling or rushing. This wasn't amateur work. This was the product of someone who understood hydraulic engineering. He reached the windmill, a 12-foot diameter wheel turning lazy in the breeze. The gear system was elegant, homemade, but precise. Water flowed up from the pump mechanism, filling the cistern at a steady rate. You designed this, he asked. Yes, Martha said, based on principles my father taught me, adapted for the materials I could get locally. The gears are carved from oak, the wheel blades from pine. Not as efficient as metal, but they work. Caleb tested one of the valves, opening and closing it. The mechanism moved smooth, no binding, no leaks when closed. He walked one of the lateral lines, checking joints, measuring the fall by eye. Every 20 feet, smaller distribution channels fed water to cultivated fields. Wheat stubble showed where harvest had already happened. Corn stood tall in another section. Root vegetables in a third. 40 acres under irrigation, Martha said. Produces enough to feed us, plus surplus for trade. I filed a patent application last month for the valve design. It's more efficient than standard gate valves, cheaper to produce. She was watching him, Caleb realized. Watching to see if he understood what she'd accomplished. Not asking for praise, just wanting recognition that this was real work, valuable work. This is better than anything I saw at Army forts, Caleb said honestly. What? Fort Laramie had engineers from West Point. We need to move quickly. Their system leaked, had pressure problems, constant maintenance. This is better. Martha's face brightened, then she caught herself, forced the expression, neutral again. But Caleb had seen it. Pride. The same pride he'd felt the first time he brought down a buffalo with a single shot, or tracked a wounded grizzly through 3 miles of forest and lived to tell about it. The pride of competence recognized. Grace is waiting at the barn, Martha said. She'll show you the livestock operation. They walked together in silence, but it was comfortable silence. Caleb noticed Martha didn't chatter to Phil. The quiet didn't feel the need to explain or justify. She'd shown him her work. The work spoke for itself. At the barn, Grace was leaning against the corral fence watching horses. She straightened when they approached all business again. Livestock is divided into 3 categories, she said without preamble. Cattle for beef sales, horses for trade, and work, chickens for eggs. We also keep 10 goats for milk and cheese. She opened a ledger she'd been carrying. Current inventory, 52 head of cattle. 20 are heifers, we bought pregnant last spring, all delivered healthy calves. 22 are mature cows, half pregnant again for spring calving. 10 are steers ready for market. Estimated value at current rates about $2,000. She flipped a page. 15 horses, 8 mares, 4 geldings, 3 colts born this year. We use 6 for work, keep the rest for trading. Horses are worth more than cattle per head. These would bring $1,400 if we sold them all, but we need them for operations. Another page. 180 chickens in the hen house behind the barn. Proper predator protection built coyote-proof fence hawk netting over the run. Averaged 90 eggs per day. We trade eggs at Fort Laramie for 15 cents per dozen. That's over $7 per month just from chickens. She closed the ledger. Total livestock value approximately $4,000. Monthly revenue from trade contracts about $43. That's enough to cover operating costs and start paying down debt, assuming we maintain current production. Caleb had been watching the cattle while she talked. They were healthy coats, glossy, no signs of disease or malnutrition, the kind of shape that came from good feed and good care. He walked to the fence, studied the nearest cow. She looked back at him, placid chewing cud, completely comfortable with human presence. "You do the hoof trimming yourself?" he asked. "Yes," Grace said. "Learned from a rancher in Laramie. It's not complicated once you understand the mechanics. Regular maintenance prevents most problems." She showed him the pasture rotation system, explained how they move cattle between sections to prevent overgrazing, described their breeding program, tracking which bulls produce the healthiest calves, outlined their partnerships with Fort Laramie for beef sales, with South Pass City for dairy products, with mining camps for premium cuts. "You built these relationships yourself?" Caleb asked. "Yes, I'm good with negotiations. Can read people know when they're lying or trying to cheat. Most traders tried it once, learned I wouldn't accept it. Now they give me fair prices because they know I'll walk away otherwise." She said it matter of fact, not bragging, just stating truth. Caleb could believe it. There was something in the set of her jaw, the directness of her gaze that said this was a woman who wouldn't be pushed. Judith found them as the sun reached its zenith. "Come back to the house. I have the financial records ready." Inside the table was covered in ledgers, receipts, contracts. Judith had organized everything into neat stacks, each labeled. "This is where we stand financially," she said, gesturing to the papers. "Total assets land worth $3,400 based on your purchase price. Equipment and infrastructure worth approximately $3,100. Livestock worth $4,000. Cash on hand, $92. Total assets, $10,592. She moved to another stack. Total liabilities debts of $2,320 due October 15th. No other outstanding obligations. Net worth if we could sell everything, $8,272. But we can't sell because the debt is in our names, not tied to the land. If we default, creditors seize the ranch auction, it just proceeds to pay debt. We get nothing." She pulled out the transfer of obligations document again. "This paper says you inherited Silas's commitments when you bought the land. I don't know if that's legally enforceable. Probably not in a federal court. But Wyoming territory operates on frontier law. Precedents here are different. Debts follow land. Contracts follow ownership. A lawyer might make this stick." She looked at Caleb directly. "So here's our position. We've built this operation from nothing. It's productive, profitable, worth significant money. But we can't sell it to pay the debt because Silas sold it to you. We can't pay the debt ourselves because we don't have enough cash. And in 3 weeks, we lose everything." "What do you want from me?" Caleb asked. "I want to know if you're going to honor Silas's obligations," Judith said. Judith. "Not the marriage part. Forget that. That was Silas's manipulation. But the partnership, the commitment to working this land together. Will you pay the debt and let us stay as partners? Or will you exercise your legal ownership and force us to leave?" The question hung in the air. Outside, a horse whinnied. The wind rattled the windows. Time seemed to stop while Caleb considered. He'd come here for solitude, for a fresh start, to build something alone where he wouldn't have to carry anyone else's pain or depend on anyone else's loyalty. 16 years in the mountains had taught him that alone on was safer. Alone meant you controlled your own fate. But looking at these three women, at what they'd built, at the hope and fear warring in their eyes, something shifted in his chest. "I'll stay tonight," he said. "Tomorrow I'll give you my answer." It wasn't commitment. It wasn't rejection. It was time to think. The women accepted it. Judith showed him to a room upstairs, small but clean, with a bed and a window looking out over the valley. Martha brought him water for washing. Grace left a plate of bread and dried meat in case he was hungry. Then they left him alone. Caleb stood at the window watching the sun arc toward the western mountains. His life had turned on moments like this before. The decision to go into the mountains after Morningstar died. The choice to survive when survival seemed pointless. Each time the decision felt too large, too permanent. But standing here in a house built by three scarred women trying to forge purpose from pain, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in 6 years. He felt the possibility of not being alone. Whether that possibility was worth the risk, he didn't yet know. But tomorrow he would decide. And whatever he chose would determine not just his future, but the future of three women who'd gambled everything on a covenant that might not legally exist, but felt more binding than any contract he'd ever signed. Caleb woke before dawn habit from 16 years of mountain living, where first light meant the difference between hunting and being hunted. The room was cold, his breath visible in the air. Through the window, stars still glittered above the valley, but the eastern horizon carried that peculiar gray that preceded sunrise. He dressed quietly, pulled on his boots, checked his weapons from pure instinct. The Colt Navy revolver hung heavy at his hip. The Hawken rifle waited where he'd leaned it against the wall. Both loaded, both ready, though he didn't expect trouble. Just couldn't break the habits that kept him alive. Downstairs, lamplight already glowed from the kitchen. The smell of coffee and frying bacon drew him down the stairs. He found Judith at the stove, dressed in the same work clothes from yesterday, hair tied back practical. "You're up early," she said without turning. "Mountain habit." "We keep mountain hours here too. Work starts at first light." She poured coffee into a tin cup, handed it to him. The coffee was strong hot, exactly what he needed. Caleb wrapped his hands around the cup, let the warmth seep into his fingers. "Did you decide?" Judith asked, still not looking at him, focused on turning bacon in the pan. "Yes." She waited. The bacon sizzled. Outside, a rooster crowed, announcing the coming day. "I'll pay the debts," Caleb said. "From the money I have left. That's $900 cash I carried with me. Won't cover all of it, but it's a start." Judith's shoulders relaxed slightly, though she still didn't turn. "And the partnership?" she asked. "I have conditions." Now she did turn, wooden spatula in hand, her face carefully neutral. Caleb set down his coffee cup. "First condition, we draw up legal partnership papers, equal ownership, 4 ways, 25% each. All decisions require majority vote." "Agreed." "Second condition, all finances transparent, every dollar accounted for. No secrets, no separate deals." "Agreed." "Third condition, the personal arrangement Silas promised, that's off the table for now. We work together, see what develops natural. No obligations, no expectations beyond honest partnership." Judith studied his face, and Caleb met her gaze steady. He saw something shift in her expression, a hardness softening into something like relief. "Agreed," she said quietly. "We never wanted obligation, Mr. Thornwood. We wanted choice. The freedom to build something real, not be trapped in what Silas manipulated." "Fourth condition," Caleb continued. 1 year. We all commit to 1 year of partnership. After that, anyone who wants out can leave with their 25% of assets. No questions, no hard feelings." "1 year," Judith repeated. She nodded. "That's fair. More than fair." "Then we have an agreement." Judith turned back to the stove, plated bacon and eggs, set the food on the table. Martha and Grace appeared from outside, carrying fresh eggs and milk, stopping short when they saw Caleb. "He's staying," Judith said simply, "as a partner, equal shares, 1 year commitment." Grace set down the milk pail carefully. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," Caleb said. "What you three built here is real, worth protecting, worth investing in." Martha smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, made her look younger, less burdened. "Then we should eat," she said. "We have a lot of work ahead of us." They sat together at the table, 4 people who'd been strangers yesterday, partners today. The food was simple but good. Nobody talked much, comfortable in the quiet. When they finished, Judith brought out paper and pen. "We should write the terms down," she said. "Make it official." For the next hour, they worked out the details. Caleb contributed his remaining $900 toward the debt. The women would continue managing operations as they'd been doing. Major decisions required at least 3 of the 4 to agree. Profits would be split equally after operating expenses. Anyone could leave after 1 year with their share of assets. Judith wrote it all in careful script. They each signed. Caleb folded the paper, tucked it in his shirt pocket. Now what? Grace asked. Now we work, Caleb declared beaming. October 15th is 3 weeks away. We need to pay down as much debt as possible. What brings in money fastest? Beef sales, Grace said immediately. We have 10 steers ready for market. Fort Laramie will take them at 12 cents per pound. Call it 1,000 pounds total, that's $120. Eggs and dairy products, Martha added. We can increase production trade more frequently. Maybe another $20 before the deadline. I can hunt, Caleb said. Elk season is open. Fresh meat and hides to trade. Elk hide brings $8 to $12. Each meat sells premium. I bring down 6 elk, that's $75 minimum. In hides, another $30 in meat. Judith was calculating on paper. That's $245, plus your $900, total $1,145. Still short by over $1,000. Then we need to find other income, Caleb said. What else can we produce or trade? The conversation continued through breakfast, cleanup, through morning chores into the afternoon. Caleb worked alongside the women, learning their routines, seeing how they'd organize the operation. Efficient, practical, no wasted motion. These women knew what they were doing. By evening, they'd identified additional revenue sources. Martha could consult for neighboring ranchers on irrigation design. Grace could broker livestock deals for others taking a commission. Judith could sell surplus vegetables before winter. Every dollar counted. We might actually make it, Martha said, as they sat down to supper. We will make it, Judith corrected. Failure isn't an option. That night, Caleb moved his gear into the barn loft. Judith had offered him one of the bedrooms, but something about sleeping in the house felt premature. Boundaries needed establishing, comfort needed building. The barn loft was dry private, good enough for now. He lay on his bedroll, listening to horses move in their stalls below, and thought about the decision he'd made. 16 years alone, and now partners with 3 women he'd met yesterday. It should have felt wrong, reckless, dangerous. Instead, it felt like the first right decision he'd made since Morningstar died. The first week passed in hard work. Caleb rose before dawn, worked until dark, fell into exhausted sleep. He taught the women mountain skills they lacked. How to field dress game properly, preserving maximum meat. How to read weather signs and cloud formations and animal behavior. How to track deer through forest without spooking them. They taught him ranch operations, the rhythm of milking, the art of cheese mating, the careful management of limited resources. Judith's organizational systems, Martha's maintenance schedules, Grace's trading strategies. Different skills, different knowledge, but it all wove together into something functional. On the 10th day, Martha found him repairing fence posts near the north pasture. The morning was cold frost, still white on the grass where shadows lingered. His breath puffed white as he worked. Can I help? She asked. Caleb nodded toward the tools. Hold that post steady while I tamp the earth. They worked in silence for several minutes, falling into easy rhythm. Martha held posts plumb while Caleb packed earth around their bases, solid and square. No wasted words, just coordinated effort. I wanted to thank you, Martha said eventually, for staying, for giving us a chance. You built something worth staying for. We built out of desperation. You stayed from choice. That's different. Caleb paused, leaning on the tamping bar. Choice and desperation are not so different. I chose to stay because I was desperate for something that mattered. Martha looked at him, brown eyes thoughtful. What happened to Morningstar, if you don't mind me asking? Most people, Caleb would have shut down the question. Too personal, too painful. But something about Martha's quiet presence, the way she asked without demanding, made him answer. Smallpox epidemic swept through the Shoshone camps in spring of 1862. Killed hundreds. Morningstar got sick in April. Fever, then the pustules. I tried everything I knew. Kept her cool, forced water down her throat, prayed to gods I wasn't sure existed. He drove the tamping bar down, hard packing earth tight. She died on the 6th day. Calling for her mother in Shoshone. I buried her in the mountains, the place where we first met. Burned our lodge according to her people's custom. Then I went into the high country alone and stayed there 6 years. You loved her. Yes. Do you think you could love again? The question hung between them, honest and direct. Caleb met her eyes.
We need to move quickly.
I don't know, he said.
The others
Love
will
isn't
catch up
something
soon.
you decide. It's something that happens or doesn't. But you're open to the possibility. I'm here, aren't I? Martha smiled, that transforming expression that made her beautiful. Yes, you're here. They went back to work, but something had shifted. A door opened, not wide, but enough to let possibility through. That evening, Grace asked him to ride to South Pass City, help negotiate a livestock deal. 2 days travel each way, a chance to see her work firsthand. They left at dawn, 2 horses loaded with trade goods. The ride was quiet at first, both of them comfortable with silence. But as the miles passed, Grace began talking about her father, about learning to read people, about the betrayal that destroyed her family. Morrison thought he was clever, she said, forging documents, stealing everything. But the real theft wasn't the money. It was my father's belief that he'd failed. That's what killed him. Not poverty, shame. Shame is a poison, Caleb said. Yes, and I won't let anyone make me feel it again. That's why I'm so careful about the business. Every contract perfect, every deal transparent. I won't give anyone ammunition to call me dishonest. At South Pass City, Caleb watched her work. The traders tried their usual tactics, offering low prices, claiming the market was soft, suggesting she didn't understand livestock values. Grace countered every argument with facts, with market data from other settlements, with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what she had and what it was worth. The final price was 15% higher than the trader's opening offer. On the ride home, Grace was quiet, almost subdued. "What's wrong?" Caleb asked. "You negotiated well." "I know, but sometimes I wonder if this is all I'm good for. Numbers and negotiations. Fighting to prove I'm not stupid or weak. You're good at it because you care about it. That's not weakness. My father thought he'd failed by losing money. Sometimes I think I'm failing by only caring about money." Caleb considered this. Money is how you protect yourself. After what Morrison did, after losing everything, you need that protection. It's not greed, it's survival. Grace looked at him and something in her face softened. "You understand. I spent 16 years alone because being alone felt safer than risking loss again. I understand choosing protection over risk. But you're here now, taking a risk. So are you." She smiled, and it was different from Martha's smile. Where Martha's was gentle, transforming, Grace's was fierce, challenging. "I guess we are." They rode in companionable silence as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that made the whole world look like it was burning beautiful. Winter arrived early that year. The first snow fell in late October, 3 days before the deadline. Caleb had seen it coming, read the signs in how the elk were moving, how thick the squirrels' stores were, how the horses grew their winter coats. "Big storm coming," he said at breakfast on October 12th. 3 days, maybe 4. "How big?" Judith asked. "Bad enough to trap us here for a week. We need to prepare now." They spent 3 days in frantic preparation, harvesting the last vegetables, moving livestock to shelter, cutting firewood, storing water. Caleb showed them how to build snow fencing around the barn doors, windbreaks that would keep drifts from blocking access to the animals. Martha reinforced the barn roof, calculating snow loads, adding support beams. Grace moved the most vulnerable animals into the closest shelter. Judith organized food supplies for both humans and livestock, rationing for worst-case scenarios. On October 14th, the sky turned the peculiar gray-green that preceded blizzards. The wind picked up cold and sharp. The first flakes started falling around noon. By evening, the world had disappeared into white chaos. Caleb had moved into the main house, by then practical necessity overriding boundaries. You couldn't survive a Wyoming blizzard sleeping in a barn. The 4 of them sat around the fireplace, listening to wind scream around the eaves, watching snow pile against the windows. "Tomorrow is the 15th, Judith said quietly. "Debt deadline." "Can't get to Laramie in this," Caleb said. "Storm will last 3 days minimum." "So we default?" "No, we negotiate extension. This is an act of any reasonable creditor will wait for weather to clear." "And if they're not reasonable," Caleb looked at her, at the fear trying to break through her controlled facade, "then we deal with it when the storm passes. Right now we focus on surviving the next 3 days." The storm lasted 4 days. 4 days of howling wind and horizontal snow, of temperatures dropping to 20 below zero, of being trapped inside with nothing but firelight and conversation. They played cards, told stories. Caleb shared tales from the mountains of grisly encounters and narrow escapes. The women talked about their lives before Wyoming, before loss, when the future still held promise instead of just survival. On the second day, Martha asked about his scar. Caleb pulled aside his collar, showed the puckered bullet wound on his shoulder. Blackfoot Raiders, summer of 1855. I was 19, stupid, thought I was invincible. Got caught alone near my trap lines. 3 of them, all better shots than me. Got lucky. The one who shot me died from my knife. The other 2 ran when they realized I wasn't going down easy. How did you survive the wound? Martha asked. Shoshone hunting party found me 2 days later. Took me to their camp. Morningstar's mother was their medicine woman. She pulled the bullet, packed the wound with herbs, kept me alive through the fever. Morningstar sat with me every day talking to me in Shoshone even though I didn't understand the words yet. When I finally woke up clear-headed, she was there. She smiled, and I knew I was going to marry her if she'd have me. Grace leaned forward. How long did you court her? 2 months. Asked her father's permission in broken Shoshone that probably sounded like a child talking. He laughed, but he said yes. We were married by their custom. Lived with her people for 2 years before the smallpox came. Do you still think about her? Judith asked. Every day, but the pain is different now. Used to be sharp like a knife in the chest. Now it's dull and old ache. Still there, but I can live with it. Judith nodded, understanding in her eyes. The fire was 5 years ago. Still feels like yesterday sometimes. On the 3rd day, the conversation turned deeper. They talked about faith, about whether God was cruel or indifferent or simply mysterious. Caleb admitted he didn't know what he believed anymore, that Morningstar's death had broken something in his relationship with the divine. I prayed, he said, begged whatever God was listening to save her. Promised anything, everything. She died anyway. So either God doesn't listen or doesn't care or has reasons I'm too small to understand. None of those options bring much comfort. I felt the same after the fire, Judith said. What kind of God takes children? What possible reason could justify burning babies to death while their mother watches? But you still wear a cross, Martha observed. Judith touched the silver crucifix at her neck. I don't know if I believe in the God of my childhood anymore, but I believe in something. Some force or principle that makes love and sacrifice mean something. Otherwise, what's the point? We're just animals suffering until we die. Maybe that's all we are, Grace said quietly. Maybe there is no point. We just survive as long as we can, try to find small moments of happiness. Then it's over. I don't believe that, Martha said. My father used to say engineering was proof of God, that the universe operates on mathematical principles, elegant, imperfect. That couldn't be accident. There's design in everything. They argued philosophy and theology through the afternoon, not angry arguing, but genuine wrestling with questions that had no answers. Caleb found himself engaged in a way he hadn't been since Morningstar died. These women were thoughtful, educated, willing to consider hard truths without flinching. On the 4th day, the storm broke. They woke to brilliant sunshine reflecting off 3 feet of fresh snow. The world looked new, pristine, untouched, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. I need to check the livestock, Caleb said. We go together, Judith replied. That's what partners do. They roped themselves together, Caleb leading, then Judith, Martha, Grace in the rear. The distance from house to barn was maybe 200 feet, but in snow this deep, it might as well have been miles. They broke trail step by exhausting step, the snow sometimes thigh-deep. Inside the barn, they found the animals alive, but stressed. 2 cows had given birth during the storm, calves wet and shivering. Caleb showed the women how to dry, the newborns get them nursing, make sure they'd survive. Working together in the cold barn, their breath steaming, hands working in coordination, Caleb felt something shift. These weren't just business partners anymore. This was something deeper. Trust built through shared hardship, respect earned through competence under pressure. That evening, after the animals were fed and the barn secured, they sat around the fire again, exhausted, satisfied, alive. We survived, Grace said. Together, Martha added. Judith looked at Caleb. Thank you for knowing the storm was coming, for preparing us. We would have lost Animo without your knowledge. You would have figured it out, Caleb said. Maybe, but you made it easier. Later that night, alone in his room, Caleb lay awake thinking about partnership and trust, about three damaged women trying to build something meaningful, about a mountain man who'd spent 6 years running from connection and now found himself wanting to stay. The next morning, they dug out the road enough to reach Laramie. The creditors were understanding about the storm delay. Caleb paid down what he could with his cash. Judith negotiated payment plans for the rest. By the end of the week, the debt was manageable, the immediate crisis averted. December passed in hard work and growing comfort. Caleb taught them to make pemmican traditional Shoshone survival food. They taught him to cook things more sophisticated than roasted meat and boiled grain. Slowly, almost without noticing, he stopped sleeping in his room and started staying up late with them talking around the fire. One evening, Martha asked him to help repair the windmill gears. They worked in the cold workshop, breath, steaming hands, working in coordination that had become instinctive. "I need to tell you something," Martha said, not looking up from the gear she was fitting. "I'm listening." "I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the cold air. Caleb's hand stilled on the wrench he was holding. "I'm not asking for anything," Martha continued, voice steady. "Not asking for promises or commitments, just being honest, because I think honesty matters to you." "It does," Caleb said quietly. "So now you know I love you. Not because you're convenient or because of some obligation, because you're kind and competent and you make silence comfortable. Like Morningstar did for you." Caleb set down the wrench, looked at her directly. Her brown eyes were clear, no manipulation or demand in them, just truth offered freely. "I can't promise I'll get there," he said. "Might take months, might take years, might never happen. I know. But I value you, I respect you, and I think given time I could love you. That's enough for now." She went back to work on the gear. After a moment, Caleb did too, but the air felt different, charged with possibility. 2 weeks later, Grace asked him to hunt with her. They tracked a small herd of elk through fresh snow, moving quiet and coordinated. When they found them, Grace took the shot. Clean kill, one shot through the heart. "Good shooting," Caleb said. "You taught me well." They field-dressed the animal together, Grace's hands steady and sure. She'd learned fast, had natural aptitude for this work. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said as they worked. "You can ask. Do you think Silas chose you specifically? Not just because you had money, but because you might actually fit with us?" Caleb considered this. Probably. He knew about Morningstar, knew I'd been alone, knew I had the skills you'd need. Manipulative as hell, but maybe effective. "Does that bother you, that we might be together because of his manipulation?" "We're together because we choose to be. Every day we choose to stay, to work together, to build this. That's not manipulation. That's decision." Grace was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, vulnerable. "I'm choosing you, Caleb. Choosing to care about you. Is that allowed?" He looked at her, saw the fierce independence warring with genuine need for connection. "It's allowed, if you can accept that I'm still figuring out how to care about anyone again." "I can accept that." She kissed him, then sudden and intense, different from Martha's gentle approach. This was passion held too long in check, finally released. Caleb kissed her back, feeling something in his chest that had been frozen for 6 years start to thaw. When they pulled apart, Grace smiled. "We should get this elk back before it freezes solid." Practical as always. Someone has to be. They worked together, quartering the animal, packing meat for transport. And if they stood closer than necessary, if their hands touched more than the work required, neither commented on it. January brought brutal cold temperatures, dropping to 30 below. The four of them were trapped on the ranch, isolated by snow and ice. But isolation felt different than loneliness. They played cards, read aloud from books, maintained equipment, planned for spring. One night, Judith found Caleb reading by firelight. The Bible Reverend Clark had given him months ago, though Caleb couldn't remember accepting it. "Finding answers?" she asked. "Finding questions, mostly." She sat beside him, close enough that he could smell lavender soap on her skin. "What questions?" How to reconcile a loving God with a world full of pain. How to believe in purpose when everything seems random. How to trust that building something matters when it can all be destroyed in an instant. Judith was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who'd wrestled with these same questions. I don't know if there's a loving God, she said, but I know there's love. I know that when I work beside Martha and Grace, and you building something that matters, I feel purpose, even if I can't explain its source. Maybe that's enough. Is it enough for you? It has to be, because the alternative is despair, and I've lived in despair. This is better. Caleb closed the book, looked at her, really looked, saw past the strong facade to the woman underneath. Someone who'd lost everything and still found strength to build again. I'm the oldest, Judith said quietly. I've lost the most. I'm the most afraid to love again, to open myself to that kind of pain. I know. But I'm also the most certain this can work, because I understand what doesn't work. Marriage without respect, love without partnership. This arrangement we have, it's better than most traditional marriages I've seen. We've built it on honesty and work and choice. She took his hand, held it. Her palm was calloused from labor, warm against his skin. I'm not asking you to love me, she said. Not yet. But I'm asking you to keep building with me, to see where this goes. I can do that. She didn't kiss him, just held his hand while the fire crackled and the wind howled outside. It was enough. February came with its own crisis. A rider from Laramie brought news. Silas Blackwood had returned. He had a U.S. deputy marshal with him, a lawyer and
What?
4 armed men. They claimed the ranch
need to
sale
move
was
quickly.
fraudulent, that Silas
The
still
others will
owned the
catch up
property,
soon.
that Caleb's deed was forged. The rider left them with a summons. They had 1 week to respond or face seizure of the property. He's back, Grace said, voice tight with controlled fury. That bastard is actually back. With legal authority this time, Judith added. A marshal means federal backing. The deed isn't forged, Caleb said. I have the original filed with the territorial office. And he probably has documents claiming his is the real one, Martha said. It's his word against yours, and he has a lawyer. They sat around the table, the summons lying between them like a coiled snake. We fight this, Caleb said, legally, properly through the courts. Courts take months, Judith replied. Meanwhile, Silas can tie up the property, prevent us from operating, bankrupt us through legal fees. Then we need leverage, Grace said, something that makes him back down before it gets to court. They spent the evening planning, strategizing, preparing for battle. Not with guns, though. Caleb made sure his weapons were ready just in case. But with law, with evidence, with the truth they could prove. When Silas Blackwood rode into the ranch yard a week later, he found 4 people waiting for him. United, prepared, and absolutely refusing to be intimidated. Silas looked exactly as the women had described. Handsome in a polished way, well-dressed, carrying himself with practiced charm. The kind of man who could sell you your own property and make you thank him for it. The deputy marshal was a different story. Thomas Garrett was older, weathered, with the careful eyes of someone who'd seen every con game the frontier had to offer. His lawyer, Edwin Crow, was young and nervous, carrying a leather case like a shield. Caleb Thornwood, Silas said, smiling like they were old friends. I'm sorry about this confusion. I know it must be distressing. There's no confusion, Caleb said. I bought this property legally. I have documentation. That's the problem, Crow said, opening his case. Our documentation suggests your deed is fraudulent. The notary seal is forged. He produced papers, spread them on a makeshift table one of Silas's men had set up. The documents looked official, impressive, damning. This is the original deed, Crow continued, showing Silas Blackwood still owns Sweetwater Ranch. Your purchase never actually completed because the notary who supposedly witnessed it doesn't exist. That's a lie, Judith said, stepping forward. We witnessed the sale. We saw the transfer. You saw forged documents, Silas said, his voice gentle, sympathetic. I understand why you believed them. The forger was very skilled. Deputy Garrett held up a hand. Mr. Thornwood, I need to see your deed, original copy. Caleb produced it from his jacket. The paper was worn from being carried, but the seal looked intact, official. Garrett examined it carefully, pulled out a magnifying glass, studied the notary mark. Seal looks legitimate to me, he said. That's because the forger used a stolen seal, Crow argued. The notary office in Denver confirms their seal was stolen 3 months before this deed was supposedly executed. It was brilliant, diabolical. Silas had created a situation where any evidence Caleb had could be dismissed as forgery. Truth became meaningless when everything could be called a lie. Here's what happens now, Crow said. Until this is resolved in court, the property is frozen. No one operates it. No one sells anything. No one makes changes. It's held in trust pending judicial review. That will bankrupt us, Martha said. We can't survive months without operating. That's unfortunate, Silas said, not sounding sorry at all, but necessary to protect my property rights. Caleb watched Silas's face read the calculation there. This wasn't about property. This was about control, about punishing 3 women who'd rejected him, who dared to build something without him. I have a counter-proposal, Caleb said. Everyone looked at him. Wyoming territory law allows for dispute resolution through challenge when courts are too distant, physical contest or trial by competition. Winner's claim stands until formal hearing. Deputy Garrett frowned. That law is rarely invoked. But it is legal. What kind of challenge? Silas asked, clearly not expecting this. Trial by work, 7 days. You run the ranch one way, we run it another. Community judges the results. Winner gets property rights confirmed pending the court case. Silas looked uncertain for the first time. His lawyer started to object, but Silas held up a hand. What are the terms exactly? 7 days, you demonstrate your ability to run Sweetwater Ranch. We demonstrate ours. Categories are survival skills, engineering, business management, and community contribution. Local ranchers and Reverend Clark judge. Winner gets clear title until the formal court case, which could take 6 months. Loser withdraws claim immediately. It was a gamble, but it was better than being frozen out while lawyers battled. Silas considered. His 4 armed men were watching him, clearly wondering if their boss was actually capable of running a ranch. The lawyer was shaking his head, but Silas ignored him. Agreed, Silas said. 7 days, may the best man win. They shook hands and Caleb felt the trap spring shut. Not on him, on Silas. Because Silas had spent 10 months watching these 3 women build this operation, but he'd never actually worked it himself. He had no idea what went into making it function. The 7 days would prove that. The trial began the next morning. Word spread fast and ranchers from 3 territories came to watch. This kind of thing didn't happen often, frontier justice in action, and people wanted to see how it played out. Reverend Clark agreed to oversee the proceedings, his moral authority giving the whole thing legitimacy. Day 1 was survival skills. Caleb and Silas each had to provision the ranch for winter, using only what they could hunt and gather. Caleb took Grace with him. They tracked elk through the forest, moving silent and coordinated. Found a herd, got into position, waited for the perfect shot. Grace took it clean kill through the heart. They field-dressed the animal, packed out 600 pounds of meat. Then Caleb showed the watching ranchers how to make pemmican, traditional preserved food. Mixed dried meat with rendered fat and berries, packed it tight. Food that would last 2 years if stored properly. Silas hired Shoshone guides, paid them to hunt for him. They brought back 2 elk and 3 deer, good haul. But Silas had no idea how to process the meat properly. His preserved food was poorly made, would spoil within months. The judges gave Caleb the win. Day 2 was engineering. Both sides had to demonstrate improvements to ranch infrastructure. Martha designed a modification to the irrigation system, adding a secondary holding tank that increased efficiency 30%. She explained the hydraulic principles, showed her mathematics, built the improvement with materials costing $12. Silas hired an engineer from Laramie. The man designed an elaborate system that looked impressive but had fundamental flaws. When tested, it leaked, the pressure was wrong, water wasted. Expensive and non-functional. The judges gave Martha the win. Day 3 through 5 were business management. They had to demonstrate trade negotiations, livestock management, and financial planning. Grace negotiated sales to 4 different buyers, playing them against each other, ending up with premium prices. Silas tried to strong-arm Fort Laramie's quartermaster and got refused outright. Judith presented detailed financial records showing profit and loss projections, reserves. Silas had hired an accountant who cobbled together numbers that didn't add up. By day 6, the outcome was clear. Caleb's team was dominating every category. Silas was desperate. On the final day, as the judges prepared to announce their verdict, he made his last play. He pulled a gun. If I can't have this ranch, he said, pointing the revolver at Caleb, nobody can. The crowd scattered. Deputy Garrett reached for his weapon, but Grace was faster. She'd been carrying her Winchester rifle all week, never far from reach. Now she raised it, smooth, aimed, fired. The bullet hit Silas's gun hand, sent the revolver flying. Silas screamed, clutching his wrist. Blood welled between his fingers. Caleb hadn't moved. He'd stood there calm, watching Silas with the cold patience of someone who'd faced death before and found it less frightening than living without purpose. Deputy Garrett had his own gun out, now pointed at Silas. That was attempted murder. You're under arrest. The 4 hired guns Silas had brought melted away into the crowd. The lawyer was already mounting his horse, clearly wanting no part of this. Reverend Clark stepped forward, his voice carrying authority. The winner of this trial is clear. Caleb Thornwood and his partners have demonstrated superior competence in every category. Furthermore, Silas Blackwood has demonstrated his true character. This ranch belongs to Thornwood and partners. I so declare before these witnesses. The crowd murmured agreement. No formal vote needed. Truth was obvious. Deputy Garrett hauled Silas to his feet, blood dripping from his wounded hand. You'll be tried for fraud, attempted murder, and a few other charges I'll think of on the ride to territorial court. As they led Silas away, he looked back at the 3 women standing with Caleb. You think you've won, the whole territory will condemn you. Living together like this, sharing one man. You'll be outcasts. Judith stepped forward, her voice clear and cold. We are already outcasts, Silas. Women who lost everything, who rebuilt from nothing. You taught us what fake love looks like. Caleb taught us what real partnership means. The territory can judge all it wants. We know what we've built. Silas was dragged away, still cursing. The crowd began to disperse, but several ranchers approached. Clayton Webb, the nearest neighbor, extended his hand to Caleb. That was well done. All of it. You and your partners ever need anything, you let me know. Others echoed the sentiment. Not all of them, Caleb noticed. Some left with disapproval clear on their faces. But enough stayed, enough offered support that it felt like maybe this strange arrangement might actually survive community scrutiny. That night, the 4 of them sat exhausted around the fire. We did it, Martha said. We actually won. Silas will go to prison, Grace added. Finally face consequences. Judith looked at Caleb. You didn't even flinch when he pulled that gun. How? Caleb shrugged. Death isn't the worst thing that can happen to a man. Living without purpose is worse. I found purpose here. What's death compared to that? You're either very brave or very damaged, Grace said. Probably both, Caleb admitted. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind they'd developed over months of working together. Then Judith spoke, her voice thoughtful. We need to address the elephant in the room. The whole territory saw us this week. Saw us working together, living together. Questions will be asked. Questions are already being asked, Martha said. Mrs. Henderson cornered me in town yesterday, wanted to know our sleeping arrangements. What did you tell her? Grace asked. That it was none of her business. But she's not wrong to wonder. We're living in an unconventional arrangement. Eventually, we need to decide what that means. Caleb looked at each woman in turn. Martha, who'd confessed her love weeks ago. Grace, who'd kissed him with fierce passion. Judith, who'd held his hand in quiet intimacy. 3 women he'd come to care about in different ways for different reasons. What do you want? He asked. We want to know if this is real, Judith said. If we're building towards something permanent, or if this is just convenient partnership until something better comes along. You want commitment. We want clarity. Caleb stood, walked to the window, looked out at the ranch illuminated by moonlight on snow. 4 months ago, this had been just land, just property. Now it was home. These 3 damaged women had become family in ways he hadn't expected and couldn't fully articulate. I can't marry all 3 of you legally, he said. Territory law doesn't allow it. But frontier custom is different. If Reverend Clark would witness it, we could make our own covenant. Legal marriage to one, spiritual covenant with the others. Equal partnership for all. He turned to face them. I'm not promising this will be easy. People will judge. Some will condemn. But I'm promising, and I'll stay. I'll work. I'll build this with you for as long as you'll have me. Martha stood cross to him, took his hands. That's enough, more than enough. Grace joined them. We're not asking for conventional. We're asking for real. Judith was last standing before Caleb with tears in her eyes. The first tears he'd seen from her since that first day when she told him about the fire. I'm terrified, she whispered. Terrified to love again. to risk that kind of pain. I know, Caleb said. I'm terrified too, but I think maybe we're less afraid together than we were alone. She nodded, unable to speak. The four of them stood there, hands joined, forming a circle. Not quite a promise yet, but the beginning of one. Outside, winter stars blazed cold and brilliant. Inside, a fire burned warm. Somewhere between those extremes, four broken people found the courage to try building something whole. March came to Wyoming territory with false promises of spring. The snow melted during the day, froze hard at night, turned the roads into treacherous ice. But inside the ranch house, something warmer was building. Four people sat around the kitchen table, papers spread between them, discussing the future with the same careful attention they'd given to business plans months before. The legal reality is this, Judith said, tapping the territorial law book she'd borrowed from Reverend Clark. Wyoming recognizes one legal marriage per person, no exceptions. Polygamy is federal crime after the Morrill Act. We can't ignore that. But frontier custom is different, Martha added. Mountain men with multiple Indian wives, traders with families in different territories. The law says one thing, practice says another. Custom isn't protection, Grace countered. If someone challenges us legally, custom won't hold up in court. Caleb listened, watching their faces. These women had learned to think strategically, to plan for worst cases. Good survival instinct. But he could see the fear underneath the logic. Fear that building something real meant risking everything. Here's what I propose, he said. Legal marriage to one of you. Has to be done to protect the property if I die. But spiritual covenant with all three, witnessed by Reverend Clark. On paper, it looks conventional enough to avoid federal prosecution. In practice, it's what we choose it to be. Who gets the legal marriage? Grace asked. The question hung heavy. Judith spoke first. I should take it. I'm oldest. Most conventional choice. Less likely to raise eyebrows if the legal wife is the oldest partner. That puts Martha and Grace in vulnerable position, Caleb said. No legal standing if something happens to me. We fix that with wills, Judith replied. Detailed inheritance documents. All three of us named as equal heirs. Children from any of us recognized as legitimate. It's not perfect, but it's protection. Martha nodded slowly. I can accept that. The legal paper doesn't change what's real between us. Neither can I, Grace said. Me and La were clear this is tactical choice, not preference. Agreed, Caleb said. Judith gets legal marriage for practical reasons. All three of you get equal partnership in everything that matters. They drafted the documents that night. Wills, property agreements, inheritance clauses. Everything witnessed and notarized. By dawn, they had a legal framework that was as solid as frontier law allowed. When Martha asked, next month, Judith said, April 15th, gives us time to prepare to make sure this is what we all want. The weeks that followed were strange. Anticipation mixed with daily routine, big decisions lurking beneath ordinary work. Caleb found himself watching the three women differently, now seeing them not just as partners, but as family being chosen deliberately. One evening, he found Judith alone in the barn checking on a cow about to calve. The animal was restless, pacing the stall, clearly in early labor. Need help, Caleb asked. Always. This is her first calf. Could be complicated. They worked together in quiet coordination, the kind they had developed over months. When the calf finally came slick and steaming in the cold air, Judith's face transformed with wonder. New life, she whispered. After all the death, still new life. Caleb cleaned the calf while Judith encouraged the mother to stand to begin nursing. The instinct was there, strong and immediate. Within minutes, the calf was on wobbly legs, finding its mother's teat. I want that, Judith said quietly. I want to bring life into this world again. Not to replace Matthew and Sarah, nothing could, but to prove life continues despite loss. You want children. I want purpose beyond survival. Children would be that, if you were willing. Caleb looked at her, really looked. Saw past the strong exterior to the woman who'd lost everything and still found courage to want more. I'm willing, when you're ready. I'm 35 years old, not many childbearing years left. If it's going to happen, it needs to be soon. Then we'll try, after the wedding. Judith smiled, genuine and unguarded. Thank you. They walked back to the house together, and Caleb realized something had shifted. This wasn't just arrangement anymore. This was commitment to building future together, whatever that future looked like. April 15th arrived cold and clear. They rode to Laramie in the pre-dawn darkness, 4 people dressed in their best clothes. Caleb wore the only suit he owned, bought years ago for occasions he'd never attended. It fit poorly, too tight in the shoulders, but it was respectable. Judith wore a blue dress, simple but well made. Not white. She'd been married before, buried children. White would have been mockery of innocence long gone. The blue suited her, brought out her eyes. Martha and Grace wore their Sunday clothes, modest and practical. They debated whether to attend, worried about appearances. But Judith had insisted. "You're witnesses. Your family. Of course you'll be there." The justice of the peace was a man named Henderson, middle-aged and efficient. His office smelled of paper and ink and old tobacco. He looked at the 4 of them with raised eyebrows, but said nothing beyond the legally required questions. "Do you, Caleb Thornwood, take Judith Harrow as your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Judith Harrow, take Caleb Thornwood as your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "By the power vested in me by Wyoming territory, I pronounce you married. Sign the register." They signed. Martha and Grace signed as witnesses. The whole thing took 10 minutes. Legal, binding, and somehow completely inadequate for what they were actually creating. Outside, Reverend Clark was waiting with his buggy. "Ready for the real ceremony?" he asked. They rode back to the ranch in silence, each lost in thought. The legal part was done conventional and unremarkable. Now came the part that mattered. Reverend Clark had helped them prepare the barn. They'd cleaned it thoroughly, hung wildflowers from the beams, arranged hay bales for seating. Simple and honest, like everything else about this arrangement. The old Reverend stood before them, his white beard and kind eyes making him look like some prophet from Scripture. He'd spent the past month studying theology and law, finding justification for what they were about to do. "We gather for sacred covenant," he began. "Not recognized by territorial law, but recognized by the God who sees hearts, not papers." He looked at each of them in turn. In Scripture, covenant is binding promise. Abraham made covenant with God, David with Jonathan, Ruth with Naomi. These were promises that transcended law, that bound souls together in purpose deeper than contract. He opened his Bible to Genesis. Abraham had Sarah his wife, but also Hagar, Sarah's handmaid, who bore him Ishmael. Jacob had Leah and Rachel's sisters both, and through them built the 12 tribes of Israel. These weren't condemned. They were blessed when done in righteousness and mutual consent. He closed the Bible, set it aside. "I don't claim your arrangement is identical to those patriarchs. Times are different, but the principle remains. Covenant made in honesty with mutual respect and genuine care is sacred regardless of convention." He turned to Caleb. "Caleb Thornwood, do you covenant before God to honor, protect, and partner with Martha Penn and Grace Sullivan as you have with Judith Harrow?" Caleb's voice was steady. "I do. I promise I will not favor one over another. I will protect all equally. I will build life with all 3 together in honesty and respect for as long as I live." Reverend Clark turned to Martha. "Martha Penn, do you covenant with Caleb, accepting your position as spiritual wife, though not legal wife, trusting his word and commitment?" "I do," Martha said clearly. "I choose this freely, understanding what it means. My commitment is no less because paper doesn't recognize it." Grace Sullivan, same question. Grace's voice was fierce. "I do. I choose love over law, partnership over propriety, faith over convention." Reverend Clark smiled. "Then by authority granted me by God, though not by territory, I witness this covenant. What you build together is holy regardless of what world calls it." He produced 3 silver rings, simple bands he'd helped Caleb commission from a silversmith in Laramie. Caleb placed one on Judith's finger, legal and spiritual together. Then one on Martha's hand and one on Grace's. Equal weight, equal value. "These rings are symbol," Reverend Clark said, "not of ownership, but of connection. Circle without end, promise without limit. Wear them as reminder of covenant chosen freely." The ceremony was over. No grand pronouncements, no crowds of witnesses, just 4 people and one old reverend in a barn that smelled of hay and horses. But it felt more real than any church wedding Caleb had ever attended. That night, they sat together on the expanded porch Caleb had built over the winter. The view stretched across the valley, stars emerging as twilight deepened to full dark. "How do you feel?" Martha asked Judith. "Married, officially, legally married. It's strange, I swore I'd never marry again after William died. But this feels different, like partnership that happens to include marriage, not marriage that demands partnership." "What about you two?" Caleb asked Martha and Grace. "Any regrets about not getting the legal paper?" "No regrets," Martha said. "The covenant matters more than the license." Grace was quiet for a moment, then spoke. "I spent years letting men define my worth. Morrison, who tried to buy me. Silas, who tried to manipulate me. But you three, you let me define myself. That's worth more than any legal status." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge. Somewhere out in the darkness, an owl hooted. Cattle lowed softly in the barn. The sounds of ranch life continuing indifferent to human ceremony. "I have an announcement," Judith said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "I'm pregnant, 3 months along, due in October." The words hung in the air, enormous with implication. Caleb felt his chest tighten, emotion he couldn't quite name. Joy mixed with fear, hope tangled with memory of loss. "You're sure?" he asked. "I'm sure. I've missed 3 cycles. I have all the signs. I wanted to wait until after the wedding to tell you in case something went wrong." Martha moved to embrace Judith, tears on her face. "Our first child. Our family's first child." "Not my child," Judith said firmly. "Our child. That was the covenant. Any children born to this family belong to all of us." Grace was smiling, fierce and proud. "We're going to need a bigger house." Caleb stood, walked to the edge of the porch, looked out at the land they'd built together. 6 months ago, he'd arrived here alone, expecting empty property and solitude. Instead, he had found 3 damaged women and the possibility of family. Now there would be a child. Evidence of life continuing, despite all the death that had come before. He turned back to them, and for the first time since Morningstar died, he let himself feel hope without reservation. "Then we start building tomorrow," he said. "Bigger house, proper nursery, everything a child needs." They talked late into the night, making plans, imagining future. For the first time, that future felt real instead of theoretical. Something tangible they could work toward. Build, protect. The months that followed were productive. They expanded the house, added 3 more bedrooms, and a larger kitchen. Caleb built a cradle from oak carved with traditional Shoshone patterns Morningstar had taught him. Martha designed a ventilation system to keep the nursery temperature stable. Grace established new trade contracts to increase income before the baby arrived. By June, word of Judith's pregnancy had spread through the territory, and with it came renewed scrutiny of their living arrangement. The trouble started at Sunday service. They'd been attending monthly as promised, to Reverend Clark, sitting together in the back pew. Most people had accepted their presence, if not their arrangement. But Judith's visible pregnancy changed the calculation. After service, Marcus Morrison approached them, flanked by 3 other men from the town council. "Reverend Clark," Morrison said loudly, ensuring others could hear, "we need to discuss the Thornwood situation." "What situation?" Reverend Clark asked mildly. "You vouched for them as business partners. But Mrs. Thornwood is clearly pregnant, which proves they're more than business partners. We believe this arrangement violates decency standards and should be investigated." Caleb felt his hand move toward his revolver, forced it to relax. Violence wouldn't help here. This had to be handled with words, not bullets. But Judith stepped forward before he could speak, her voice clear and cold as mountain water. "Mr. Morrison, let me clarify something. I am legally married to Caleb Thornwood. We have certificate filed with territorial office. A married woman bearing her husband's child is hardly scandal." "But you're living with 2 other women," Morrison pressed, "sharing 1 man. That's indecent, possibly illegal. We're 4 adults living on same property, working same ranch. Many frontier families have extended relatives living together. Are you suggesting that's illegal?" "I'm suggesting your arrangement is improper." Grace stepped up beside Judith. "Improper, we work harder than most families in this territory. We contribute to community. We harm no one. What exactly is improper about that?" "The sleeping arrangements," Morrison said, face reddening. "Everyone knows you're all sharing, all involved in unseemly relations." "What everyone knows and what's true are different things," Martha said quietly. "You're gossiping, Mr. Morrison, inventing scandal where none exists. Reverend Clark raised his hand, voice carrying authority that silenced the growing murmur of congregation. I will address this once clearly, so there's no confusion. I have examined the Thornwood household. They are people of faith, people of integrity, people who contribute positively to our community. Their business arrangements are their own concern. Their household is managed with more Christian charity than many conventional marriages I could name. He looked directly at Morrison. Furthermore, Marcus, I seem to recall you owe the Thornwood Ranch $60 for beef supplied last month. Perhaps you should focus on paying your debts rather than judging how others live. Morrison flushed deeper, opened his mouth to argue, then thought better of it. The crowd was watching, and public shaming over unpaid debts carried weight in frontier communities. The matter is closed, Reverend Clark said firmly. Unless the territorial marshal has legal complaint, the Thornwood family will be left in peace. Anyone who cannot accept that is welcome to worship elsewhere. The crowd dispersed, some grumbling, others nodding approval, but the message was clear. The Reverend's protection held for now. As they walked to their wagon, Caleb noticed several families making point of greeting them, offering support. Clayton Webb, the neighboring rancher, shook his hand. Don't let Morrison bother you. Half the people calling you indecent have their own secrets. You're just honest about yours. But not everyone was supportive. As they drove home, they passed 3 families who turned their backs, deliberately making their disapproval clear. It's going to get worse, Judith said quietly. When the baby comes, when it's undeniable proof that we're living as family, not just business partners. Let it get worse, Grace said. We've faced worse than gossip. Gossip can turn violent, Martha observed, if enough people decide we're a threat to moral order. Caleb had been thinking the same thing. Frontier justice could be harsh, unpredictable. A mob convinced of righteousness was dangerous as any army. We need allies, he said, more than just Reverend Clark. People with standing in the community who will vouch for us. Over the next weeks, they worked deliberately to build those alliances. Caleb helped neighboring ranchers with difficult tasks, using his mountain skills to track predators to find lost livestock. Martha consulted on water systems, sharing her knowledge freely. Grace negotiated favorable trades for multiple families, building network of economic interdependence. Slowly, grudgingly, acceptance grew. Not universal, not enthusiastic, but enough people owed them favors, benefited from their presence, that open hostility became difficult to maintain. September arrived with Judith's belly swollen large, the baby active and strong. Martha had been reading medical texts, preparing to assist with birth. Grace had stockpiled supplies. Caleb had built emergency plans for every possible complication. The baby came on October 3rd, 2 weeks early, but healthy. Labor lasted 14 hours, Judith's screams echoing through the house, while Caleb paced outside, helpless and terrified. He'd lost one child before it was born when Morningstar died. The thought of losing another was almost more than he could bear. But at dawn, Martha emerged with tears streaming down her face and a small bundle in her arms. A son, she said, healthy and strong. Judith wants you. Caleb took the stairs 3 at a time. In the bedroom, Judith lay exhausted but radiant, her hair sweat-soaked, her face transformed with joy and relief. Meet Samuel, she said. Samuel Thornwood. The baby was tiny, red-faced, perfect. Caleb held him with shaking hands, this small life that represented hope and future and terrifying vulnerability. He has your eyes, Judith whispered. He has your strength, Caleb replied. Grace and Martha crowded into the room, all of them gathered around the baby. 4 adults who'd built family from loss, now holding the proof that life continued, that love could create instead of just endure. Our son, Judith said, looking at all 3 of them. Not just mine, ours. And it was true. Over the following weeks, they all cared for Samuel together. Caleb learned to change cloths to soothe crying with the same patience he'd used tracking game. Martha designed a cradle that rocked on a spring mechanism, gentle and constant. Grace sang Irish lullabies her father had taught her. The baby thrived. Fat and healthy, he grew strong on Judith's milk and their collective attention. And watching him grow, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in 8 years. He felt whole. 1 year after his arrival, September came again to Wyoming territory. The 4 of them sat on the porch with Samuel sleeping in his cradle, watching sunset paint the valley gold and crimson. 1 year, Judith said. Time to evaluate, as we agreed. The numbers are good, Grace reported. Assets now total $11,600. We've paid all debts, have positive cash flow, expanded operations. Financially, we're stable. Infrastructure is solid, Martha added. Irrigation serving 60 acres now. Livestock healthy and breeding well. I've filed 3 patents bringing in consulting income. Community relationships are mixed, Judith said honestly. Some people support us, some tolerate us, some actively disapprove. But we haven't been run out of town, so that's progress. They all looked at Caleb. Personal assessment, Judith asked. Caleb took a long moment before answering, choosing words carefully. Year ago, I came here alone. Thought alone was safer, simpler. I was wrong. This year has been hardest I've lived since Morning Star died. Harder than mountains, harder than winters, harder than anything. He paused, let them absorb that. But it's also been best year, because hard doesn't mean bad. You 3 taught me that. Building something real is hard. Caring about people is hard. Risking loss is hard, but it's worth it. Samuel proves it's worth it. So you're staying, Martha asked. I'm staying, if you'll have me. We'll have you, Grace said, smiling. Then I have something to say, Judith announced. She stood moved to stand before them. Year ago, we made covenant out of desperation. We needed partnership to survive. But somewhere in this year, survival became living. Partnership became family. And I want to formalize that. She looked at Caleb, then at Martha and Grace. I want us to commit, not just one more year, but as long as we all shall live. Covenant that doesn't end, doesn't expire, doesn't have escape clauses. Real family chosen deliberately and maintained intentionally. That's a big commitment, Martha said quietly. I know, that's why I'm asking, not demanding. Each of us needs to choose this freely. Grace spoke first. I choose this. I choose you 3. Choose Samuel. Choose whatever children come after. I choose family over independence. I'm in for life. Martha nodded. Same. This is where I belong. These are my people. I'm staying until I die. They all looked at Caleb. He stood moved to where Samuel slept peaceful in his cradle. This small life so vulnerable, so full of possibility. The son of his body but raised by 4 parents who loved him equally. Living proof that family could be chosen, created, built deliberately from damaged pieces. I spent 16 years in mountains because I thought solitude was strength, Caleb said. Took me too long to learn that real strength is commitment. Standing with people through hard times. Building something that lasts beyond yourself. He turned to face them. I'm committed. For life. Whatever comes, we face it together. They stood together, 4 people who'd found each other through manipulation and desperation, who'd chosen to stay through honesty and work. Family built on purpose instead of accident. Then it's decided, Judah said. We're family, real, permanent, until death parts us. The sun set fully, then stars emerging in the darkening sky. Inside the house, a fire burned warm. Outside the ranch they'd built together settled into evening quiet. And 4 people who'd lost everything found they'd gained something better. Not the lives they'd planned, but the lives they needed. Winter came early again that year, but they were ready. Supplies, stockpiled livestock, secured house warm and tight. They spent long evenings by the fire, Samuel growing from infant to baby, who smiled and grasped and began to recognize faces. Caleb taught him Shoshone words, the same ones Morning Star had taught him. Martha read to him from engineering texts, never too early to learn. Grace sang him songs of Ireland and frontier. Judith held him close, this second chance at motherhood, this proof that life could replace loss. They were happy, not perfect, not without conflict, but genuinely happy in ways none of them had expected to feel again. Then February brought visitors. 3 men rode into the ranch yard on a cold morning, their horses steaming in the frigid air. Well-dressed, official-looking, the kind of men who represented authority and usually problems. Caleb met them with rifle loose in his hands, not threatening but ready. Behind him, Judith held Samuel, Martha, and Grace flanking her. Caleb Thornwood, the lead man asked. I am. I'm Richard Stern, attorney from Cheyenne. I represent several concerned citizens who filed complaint with the territorial government regarding your household arrangements. Caleb's stomach tightened. This was the confrontation they'd known would come eventually. What kind of complaint? Allegations of polygamy, moral corruption, and endangering a child by raising him in an unseemly environment. There's petition to remove the baby from this household, place him with a proper Christian family. Judith's arms tightened around Samuel. You're not taking my son. That will be determined by a territorial judge. I'm here to serve notice of hearing. March 15th in Cheyenne, you're required to appear and answer charges. He handed over legal documents, official seals, and signatures. Caleb scanned them quickly. This was serious. Federal law against polygamy, territorial authority over child welfare. They could actually lose Samuel, lose everything. We'll be there, Caleb said. The lawyers rode away, leaving the four of them staring at papers that threatened to destroy their family. They can't take him, Judith said, voice breaking. I won't lose another child. I won't. They won't, Caleb said with more confidence than he felt. We'll fight this, legally, properly. We'll win. But privately, he wasn't sure. The law was clear. Polygamy was illegal, and they were living an arrangement that looked like polygamy no matter how they defined it. They spent the next month preparing, gathering character witnesses, documenting their financial stability, collecting letters of support from community members who approved of them. Reverend Clark wrote lengthy theological defense of their covenant, citing biblical precedent and frontier custom. Clayton Webb testified to their good character and contribution to community. Fort Laramie's quartermaster vouched for their reliable business dealings. Martha's consulting clients praised her expertise and integrity. But Caleb knew it might not be enough. Judges didn't always care about character when law was clear. The hearing was held in a Cheyenne courthouse, formal and intimidating. The territorial judge was a stern man named Blackwell, old enough to remember when Wyoming was truly wild, conservative enough to view progress with suspicion. The prosecutors laid out their case. 4 adults living together, 1 legal marriage, but clear evidence of romantic involvement among all parties. A child being raised in what they called a morally corrupt environment. They brought witnesses. Morrison testified about the improper arrangement. A woman from Laramie claimed she'd seen inappropriate affection between Caleb and Grace in town. A traveling preacher condemned them as sinners destroying the moral fabric of society. Then it was their turn. Reverend Clark took the stand, first his white beard and gentle eyes lending him natural authority. I've known the Thornwood family for over a year, he said. I've observed them closely, as is my duty as spiritual advisor. What I've seen is commitment, integrity, and genuine love. But they're living in polygamous arrangement, the prosecutor argued. They're living in extended family structure. Caleb is legally married to 1 woman. The others are household members, business partners, friends. Where is the crime in that? They share romantic involvement. That's speculation, not evidence. I've seen no behavior that would be inappropriate in any close family. The prosecutor tried to press, but Reverend Clark held firm. His moral authority was hard to challenge directly. Judith testified next, holding Samuel, her voice clear and strong. I'm Samuel's mother. I love him more than anything in this world. He's safe, healthy, happy. He has 4 adults who care for him, protect him, teach him. How is that worse than having 1 parent, or 2? More love, more protection, more resources. Explain to me how that harms him. But the moral example, the prosecutor began, the moral example of 4 people who choose commitment over convenience, who work hard, contribute to community, raise a child in love and stability. That's the example I want my son to see. Grace and Martha testified to their roles in the household, to the financial stability they'd built, to the community contributions they'd made. Clayton Webb described how they'd helped his ranch avoid bankruptcy. The quartermaster detailed their reliable business practices. Character witness after character witness painted picture of responsible contributing citizens who happen to live in unconventional arrangement. Finally, Caleb took the stand. The prosecutor went after him immediately. Mr. Thornwood, are you involved romantically with all 3 women? I'm married to Judith legally. I care deeply about Martha and Grace. The exact nature of those relationships is personal and private. So you admit to romantic involvement with multiple women. I admit to caring about multiple people. Same as anyone with family and friends. But you live together, sleep under same roof, raise child together. Yes, we're family. Family lives together. This isn't normal family structure. Caleb met the prosecutor's eyes directly. Normal is what works. My family works. My son is love, safe, thriving. We harm no one. We contribute to our community. We follow God as we understand him. What about that requires government intervention? The prosecutor tried several more angles, but Caleb held steady. Mountain Man patients refusing to be provoked or trapped. Judge Blackwell listened to everything, his face unreadable. When testimony concluded, he adjourned for consideration. They waited 3 days. 3 days of staying in a Cheyenne boarding house, taking turns holding Samuel, trying not to imagine what losing him would mean. On the third day, they were summoned back to court. Judge Blackwell looked at them with stern expression, and Caleb's heart sank. This was it. They were going to lose. I've considered all testimony carefully, the judge began. The law is clear regarding polygamy. It is illegal under federal statute, no ambiguity there. He paused and the silence was crushing. However, the law also requires proof of actual polygamous marriage, multiple marriage certificates, multiple legal unions. What I see in this case is one legal marriage and 3 adults living on same property. Unconventional, certainly, but not illegal. Hope flickered in Caleb's chest. Furthermore, regarding child welfare, my duty is to determine what serves the child's best interest. I see a healthy, well-cared-for infant. I see financial stability. I see multiple adult caregivers who are competent and caring. I see no evidence of harm or neglect. The judge looked directly at the 4 of them. I don't approve of your arrangement. I think it's morally questionable and sets poor example. But my job is not to enforce my personal morality. It's to enforce the law. And the law as applied to your specific situation has not been violated. He struck his gavel. Case dismissed. The child remains with his mother. The household may continue as is provided no actual polygamous marriage occurs. You're walking a legal tightrope, Mr. Thornwood. Don't fall off. Relief hit like physical force. Judith clutched Samuel, tears streaming down her face. Martha and Grace grabbed each other's hands. Caleb felt his knees go weak. They'd won. Not completely, not universally, but enough. Samuel was theirs. The family could continue. Outside the courthouse, Reverend Clark was waiting. Told you faith and truth would prevail, he said, smiling. We got lucky, Caleb replied. No, you got justice, not always the same as luck. They rode home in triumph, exhausted but victorious. The threat had been faced and overcome. Their family had been tested and held together. But Caleb knew this wouldn't be the last challenge. Unconventional lives drew ongoing scrutiny. They'd have to be careful, maintain appearances, continue building community support. It would be hard work, but then everything worth having required hard work. The years that followed proved him right. More children came. Rebecca in 1870, Martha's daughter. Catherine in 1872, also Martha's. Patrick in 1874, Grace's son. James in 1876, Grace's second son. William in 1878, Judith's second son. Ruth in 1880, Judith's daughter. Daniel in 1882, Martha's third child. 8 children total, raised by 4 parents who loved them equally. The house expanded to accommodate them, rooms added, space found, love multiplied instead of divided. The ranch prospered. Caleb's mountain skills combined with the women's management created operation that was model of efficiency. Other ranchers consulted them. Martha's patents brought in steady income. Grace's trading network expanded across 4 territories. They became, against all odds, pillars of the community, not universally loved, but respected. Their children were well-behaved, their business practices honest, their community contributions significant. Reverend Clark grew old, watching over them, his blessing continuous even as his health failed. When he died in 1885, they built a small chapel in his honor, non-denominational, open to anyone seeking spiritual guidance without judgment. They established a school in 1880, taught children from 12 families, ensured the next generation had education and opportunity. They helped families avoid foreclosure, shared knowledge, freely built community instead of just property. Life wasn't always easy. There were illnesses, accidents, losses. There were people who never accepted them, who preached against them from church pulpits. There were moments when the weight of judgment felt crushing. But there was also love, deep, abiding, chosen love, the kind that survived hardship because it was built on honest foundation. And there was legacy, 8 children who grew into confident, capable adults, leaders and innovators, people who changed their communities for better. Samuel became ranch manager, expanding operations across 3 territories. Rebecca became civil engineer, designed water systems for growing towns. Catherine taught school, inspired hundreds of students. Patrick entered politics, served in territorial legislature. James ran trading company that employed 40 people. William became reverend, continuing Clark's work. Ruth studied medicine, one of first female doctors in Wyoming. Daniel studied engineering at Colorado School of Mines. By 1897, there were 14 grandchildren and 1 great-grandchild on the way. The Thornwood family had grown from 4 damaged people into thriving multi-generational legacy, which brought Caleb full circle to that February evening, sitting by the fire with his grandson Jonathan, telling the story that had begun 30 years before. So you see, Caleb said, finishing the tale, courage is an absence of fear. It's making choices that feel impossible because they were right. Jonathan sat quiet, absorbing everything he had heard. Outside, night had fallen, completely stars bright against black sky. Did you ever regret it? Jonathan asked. The judgment, the struggle, the unconventional life. Caleb thought about that, about hard moments and hard years, quickly. About battles fought and losses endured. Only one regret, he said finally. Jonathan waited. I regret the 6 years I wasted in mountains after Morningstar died. 6 years alone, believing solitude was strength. That's time I could have spent building, connecting, living. But the 30 years since I came here, no regrets, not one. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts. Easy lives don't leave legacy. Hard lives lived with purpose change the world. He stood, walked to his desk, opened a drawer. Inside lay the Bowie knife that had been with him for 45 years. The knife that killed the grizzly, that scarred his face. The knife that dressed countless elk and deer. The knife that stood ready when Silas Blackwood threatened his family. This is yours now, Caleb said, offering it to Jonathan. Take it to war. Let it remind you what Thornwood family stands for. Jonathan took the knife reverently. What do we stand for, Grandpa? We stand for choosing right over easy, for building family through commitment, not just blood, for facing judgment with integrity, for creating legacy that outlasts us. He put his hand on Jonathan's shoulder. You're going to war. You'll face hard choices. Men will tell you what's proper, what's conventional, what's safe. But remember this. He tapped the knife in Jonathan's hands. Proper doesn't mean right. Conventional doesn't mean good. Safe doesn't mean worthy. Sometimes the right path looks like madness. Sometimes family is built, not born. Sometimes love requires courage more than anything else. Jonathan nodded, tears in his eyes. I'll remember, Grandpa. Then you'll do fine. Now let's eat. Your grandmother is probably ready to feed half of Wyoming, and refusing Judith's cooking is still the most dangerous thing a man can do in this house. They walked to the kitchen together, grandfather and grandson. Around the table sat the family. Judith, 75, now hair white as winter, still commanding respect and love in equal measure. Martha, 72, still designing innovations in her workshop. Grace, 70, now still negotiating deals that left younger traders shaking their heads in admiration. 8 adult children with their own children. 23 people total, all descended from or connected to 4 damaged souls who'd chosen to build family from ruins. The table was loud with conversation, warm with laughter, full of life. This was what covenant meant. Not contract or obligation, but choice renewed daily across decades. After dinner, Jonathan prepared to leave. Early train in the morning, couldn't be late. He hugged each grandmother, his father, his aunts and uncles and cousins. Finally, he stood before Caleb, the knife secured to his belt. Thank you for the story, Jonathan said, for showing me what courage really is. Come back safe, Caleb replied. Family will be here waiting. He watched his grandson ride away into the darkness, heading toward war, toward future, toward whatever choices he'd have to make. And Caleb thought about legacy, about 4 people who'd started with nothing but loss and built something that would last generations, about children and grandchildren who carried their values forward, about community transformed by example of commitment over convention. It had been worth it, every hard moment, every judgment, every struggle, worth it for this, for family built deliberately and maintained intentionally, for love that transcended law and outlasted criticism. The next morning, Caleb woke before dawn as always. Mountain habits died hard. He dressed, quietly went downstairs to find Judith already awake making coffee. "Can't sleep?" he asked, thinking about Jonathan, about all our children going into world-facing challenges we can't protect them from. "We raise them strong. They'll manage." "I know, but mothers worry. It's our job." Caleb poured coffee, stood beside her at the window. Outside, first light was touching the eastern mountains, painting them gold and crimson. "I've been thinking," Judith said quietly, "about what we built here, whether it was worth all the bond. Was it?" She turned to look at him, this woman who'd lost husband and children to death, who'd risked everything to build new family from ashes. "Every second," she said, "every moment of judgment, every hard year, every battle fought, worth it for the family we created, for the children we raised, for the legacy we're leaving." She took his hand, fingers interlaced. "Thank you for staying, for choosing us when you could have chosen solitude. Thank you for giving me reason to stay." They stood together watching sunrise, 64 and 65 years old, married 30 years partners, in everything that mattered. Behind them, the house began to wake. Children and grandchildren, stirring, preparing for the day's work. The ranch needed tending, life needed, living family needed maintaining. It was hard work. It had always been hard work. But it was work that mattered, work that built legacy, work that proved love could create instead of just endure. And that, Caleb thought, watching the sun rise over the valley he'd first seen 30 years before, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.